All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Wealth Building for Dummies podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Demian, and I'm here with Renji Matthew. And on today's podcast, we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about compound interest and why it's so important for your money and the difference that it'll make, actually looking at real numbers. We're going to talk about the rule of 72. And then we're probably going to go into a little bit about what this looks like for banks using the rule of 72 and compound interest because banks know how to leverage the rule of 72 to their advantage. And we'll be able to look at those numbers together here in just a moment to go over that. Before we dive into that, Renji, if you want to, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and you can take us through what compound interest is, first of all, for our viewers. So are you able to see this? And if I go slideshow, you can see the full screen, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
let me
cool.
make it bigger on my screen. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so Albert Einstein said interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, he who doesn't pays it. That's a powerful quote from Einstein. So it explains it itself. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. If you look at banks understand compound interest so well because they take your money that you put in the bank and they lend it back out to you in the form of loans, credit cards, whatever it may be, mortgage, and they're making anywhere from 3, 4, 5, up to 20, 30% on a credit card. So they have figured it out and they're making bank on you. But those people that haven't figured it out, we're paying on that, and we're paying the bank the interest, and they're making money off of that. So this podcast we'll talk about a little bit about how that would look like Kyle said, with physical numbers, and at the end we can also talk a little bit about how you can be your own bank and set something up like that for yourself too.
For sure. And Albert Einstein is, one of the smartest people in the world. And the fact that he has this quote out there, but I don't think it's talked about enough. People don't focus on it enough. It often goes and it's like overseen. People don't, stop to actually take in the importance of it and actually focus on how they can get it to work for them, which I think is part of the problem with so many people and why they struggle with money. Because it's pretty simple. But now we're going to talk about the rule of 72 and kind of how it goes hand in hand and what compound interest actually looks like using the rule of 72 with different rates of returns. But the rule of 72, simply enough, is just a shortcut that is used to estimate the number of years that's required to double your money at a given rate of return. So it's a formula. And what does that formula look like? It looks like this. You take 72 and you divide your interest rate into it, and that gives us how many years it takes for that beginning balance that you started off with, that amount of money, for it to double, right? So to demonstrate this, we wanted to share our screen and then go over to the handy dandy compound interest calculator from investor.gov. And so if we start with $10,000, and the number or the amount doesn't matter, right? Add a zero, take a zero off. It's going to give you it's the same concept, right? The same understanding of the concept. We're not going to contribute any more money to it, but we're going to give this $10,000 72 years to grow. At the end of the 72 years, we're going to figure out what the balance would be, and we're going to use an estimated 1% interest rate. Okay, so using the rule of 72, if you're only growing your money at a 1% interest rate, 72 divided by 1 is going to equal 72 years for your money to double, right? And so if we click this, in 72 years, your $10,000 would be worth just $20,000, right? Renji, anything else that you want to add on to this before we show them, what it might look like for 4% rates of return?
No, that's just self-explanatory, so
Okay,
go on.
cool. And then actually, before we get to 4%, just to show you guys, kind of how this works, if we were just to even go to a 2% rate of return, 72 divided by 2, right, using the formula, 72 divided by 2 would give us 36 years for your money to double, right? So a 2% interest rate over 72 years would have your money double twice. Your 10,000 would turn to 20,000 in 36 years. And then after 72 full years, you would have about 41,000. Right? And then let's just go to 4%. And Renji, I know we kind of were messing around with this and looking at this before the show, but to our listeners or the people watching
Mhm.
that don't know what the number is going to come up and show, I want you just to take a second and think about from a 2% rate of return to a 4%, what would you expect this new number to be? Instead of 41,000, how much would you expect to have? Because this
At
might
least
surprise you.
double. At
At
least
least double.
double.
And so if we do the math, it is about double because there would be four doubles inside of the 32 years. Right? So at just 4% rate of return in 72 years, you'd have $168,000. And then lastly, let's look at let's do 10%. And I don't think we looked at 10% and what that would be. But 10% rates of returns in 72 years, oh my gosh, would be $9.5 million. So you start with the same $10,000, and if you earn a 10% rate of return every single year, in 72 years, you'd have 9.5 million. Versus if you just earned a 1% rate of return, you would only have $20,000. Now, what I want you guys to think about, and what we'll look up here is the average interest rate for, let's do just what, bank accounts in the US. Interesting. So that's climbing up. So it's half of a percent. So we were just looking at what it would do with 1%. This is with half a percent rate of return. So people all day, every day are opening up bank accounts, right, and putting their money into bank accounts and savings accounts, and they're just letting it sit there, right? Renji, if you want, go ahead and talk about why keeping your money and just saving it at a bank is not a good financial decision, and it's all going to relate back to this, but go ahead.
Yeah, so if you have
And
an
what the banks do
emergency
with the money.
fund, yeah, so the best thing for a bank is like if you need it for, have an emergency fund or 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. That's good to keep in a bank because you can access it right away. Something that we talked about in a previous episode, we talked about the five principles of money, and two of those principles was safety and rate of return. So if you're looking at the bank, you have the safety. You don't have to worry about your money going anywhere. You can't really say that anymore now that there have been banks that shut down and stuff. But traditionally, if you put money in the bank, it's safe, right? Then there's rate of return, which, like Kyle just showed, it's 0.5% of your money that you're getting growth. And that's average around the country. So you could be getting more or less. So what do you want to do? Do you want to keep doing that, or do you want to do what the bank's doing and start growing your money like the bank is? Because like we talked about before, when you let's say you had 100,000, you put it in the bank, they're taking that 100,000, lending it right back to you in the form of mortgages, credit cards, whatever it is, and mortgages. It's right now mortgage percentages are in the 7-8%, which is crazy. And not only that, think about credit cards. Credit card percentages can be in the 20, 30 percentile. So think about how much more the bank is making back on your money over time. And that's just you as one person. Think about all the millions of people, billions of people that put money in the bank, right? And not just in America, all over the world. So how can you do the same thing? We have talked about accounts on here in the past on the previous episodes about there's tax-free and tax-deferred accounts where you can put your money in. It's safe just like in the bank account where your money never goes down if the market does. At the same time, you can compound like the bank does, and over time, you could grow just like that. And more so because it's tied to the market without actually being in the market. It's just like what the bank does. So when you put money in the bank, if the bank takes that money and puts it in the market, when the market goes up or down, if the bank makes money or loses money, it doesn't affect you any. It's the same way these accounts work. When you put money into these accounts, they're partnering with you in a sense and putting it in the market. So if the market makes money, they share that profit with you. But if the market loses money, it doesn't affect you anything because it's not actually in the market, it mirrors the market. So it grows when the market goes up, but when the market comes down, you plateau. So you never lose any, and then you get to capture in the gains too. You don't lose your capital, the principal, or the gains that you had. So but yeah, so it has like the safety and the rate of return there. And like I said, it could be tax free or tax deferred. So the other principles all go into. What you want? Do you want to add anything to what I just talked about, Kyle?
Yeah, the one thing I was thinking of as you were talking is people can talk about compound interest, and then they forget the fact that when you lose money, you lose the ability to compound because you're going
Mhm.
backwards instead of going forwards almost, right? Like in this scenario, when we're talking about the bank, there's never an opportunity for them to ever lose money because you're giving them money and they're giving you 1% in return. And then they're turning around and they're giving it to people in the form of different types of loans, right? Car loans, which I pulled up a chart, average of about 5 to 7% rates right now. The average mortgage loan is probably right inside of there, 6 to 8% or so. So you're giving them your money in return, they're giving you 1%. They're turning around and growing this money at 6, 7, 8% just in those, standard loan types versus maybe even credit cards at 20, 25, 30%. I was watching a show yesterday and they were asking, what's the highest credit card interest rate that you've ever seen? And there were some people commenting that they've seen 30, 31% interest rate credit cards out there. And like that's just all ways that the bank is continuously compounding and growing and accumulating money. So the bank knows at best how to grow and accumulate your money. But you can't compound your money if you're going backwards or if you're losing. So you have to be in a position where you're either lending the money out to other people, right? And they're paying you back and you're making the interest, or you're in different vehicles and different accounts that allow you to never lose principal and you're only ever compounding and you're only ever growing,
Mhm.
right? Anything else you want to say, add to that, Renji?
Yeah, you tied it in with what we talk about a lot, and we one thing we harp on is passive income, right? So, and one of the ways of passive income we talk a lot about is real estate. But there are, for those of you that have heard or are experienced with real estate, you might have heard of hard money lenders or lenders or whatever it is. What are they doing? They're doing exactly what the bank's doing, but with their own money. So, like we talked about before, there are tax-free accounts out there that you could do the same, grow the same way the banks are growing. And you could be your own bank in the sense where, let's say you come in contact with someone that is an expert in real estate and you don't know anything about real estate, but you have money. Imagine lending that money to that real estate investor to do whatever they want, but they promise to pay you annually 10%. If they pay you annually 10% on, let's say, on a $100,000 investment, that's 10K of income you're making every year passively without doing anything. So this is where you could do that and make, and again, this is only if you have money. We talked about how to make money in real estate without money. This is another way to make money in real estate with money, where you can truly be passive. You don't have to worry about looking for the properties or anything like that. If you know a real estate investor that's experienced and know what they're doing and you trust them and you have money, you can lend it to them just like a bank would. But the difference between you and the bank is with the bank, they have to worry about credit checks, they have to do background checks, all of these things, and it might take 30 to 45, 60 days to close on a property. With you being a hard money lender, you can close within a week, which is what real estate investors want because they don't want to have to lose out on a deal because they're waiting for the bank to lend them money. But if you are a hard money lender and you're lending your own money to them, you could do it in a couple of days, even a week. And then that's why they would pay you that 10% interest compared to paying the bank a lot less because it's the ease of having access right away. They're willing to pay you the 10%. And then what the investor would do is once they flip that house and refinance it, they would just pay you off by going and refinancing the house with the bank. They would get a lot cheaper interest, but now they have the money of the after repair value, which is way more than what they put in to buy the property. Now you can either they can pay you 10% annually, or they can pay you out, and you didn't do anything. All you did was lend your money out to them. Wouldn't that be great?
You just sat back and collected the checks.
Exactly, just like the banks do, and now you're
Just like the
doing it
banks do.
yourself.
100%. Awesome. Well, I think this was a good podcast, to talk about the Rule of 72, talk about compound interest. And while I think they're basic concepts, everybody should start to understand when they start to learn about money and they want to build wealth. It's something that's often overlooked, you know. And I think with that, Renji, I think this is a good stopping point to our podcast, unless there was anything else you wanted to mention and bring up or go into.
No, I think the only thing I would add is always do your research, always be looking out what's out there, because unless, I can say this is true for me and Kyle, unless you're told these things or you're doing your own research, you're not going to hear about all this stuff. You're not going to know about what's out
Yeah.
there, because for the longest time, I only knew about 401ks and IRAs or Roths because that's all your job's going to offer. But if you go and do your research, you'll find there's so many more things out there that's way more beneficial for you than anything the government's going to set up for you. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, yeah, make sure to leverage the Rule of 72 and the leverage compound interest for your benefit. Now that you know, start exploring other ways to have your money grow at higher rates of returns instead of just sending the banks those higher rates of returns, right? So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Wealth Building for Dummies podcast. I'm Kyle Demian. This was Renji Matthew. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, if there's anything that we can do to help you guys out, just let us know. We're here to help. Take care.